And, it's unfortunate we are dealing with such a heavy issue, but it must be addressed, and I'm looking at the developments. Now, just mere days after we saw officers being charged for the kidnapping and murder of businessman Kunji Bihari, we are looking at another development where a businessman was kidnapped with, at least via the video, the CCTV camera footage, men wearing what appears to be police uniforms. Still, we can't confirm, we don't know, we can't refute. But it is quite a serious development. And this is something that's not new. We have seen men using apparel that belongs, or at least that resembles that of the TTPS. We have seen people using camouflage in the past. So much so camouflage is illegal. You can't wear camo because people would have abused the camouflage in the past to commit crime and to deal with issues surrounding criminality. What's your take on the most recent development, and how could we put measures in place to truly curb and to send a statement that this will not be tolerated?
Well, the thing is, it is such a multi-layered issue and problem, because you still have to question as to whether there is the involvement of genuine police officers, whether at the scene or behind the scenes in some of these scenarios. All right, we recently had, I think, 2 police officers who were charged and who before the courts in relation to another kidnapping scenario recently.
Yeah, that's what businessman Kunji Bihari, who I just mentioned there earlier.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So it is clear that one way or the other, you have an element of police involvement in some of these crimes. You've had scenarios in the past where police officers have been charged for renting out their firearms, renting out their uniforms. So, even if these individuals are not police officers, it would certainly appear that there is at times some definite link with officers who are serving members of the TTPS. So, Jason, let me tell you, the problem, it goes right back to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and their management, or if one wishes to look at it another way, mismanagement of the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago. And you see, I always say that while civil society groups and religious groups and, the psychiatrists and the, counselors and the schools and the parents and everybody else, we all have a role to play. We must never for a minute shift the fundamental responsibility for keeping us safe, keeping us protected. That responsibility is with the TTPS. So if you recognize that you have a system where persons are either using genuine police gear or maybe creating gear to look like police officers and, committing crimes under the guise of allegedly being police officers, then one would imagine that the TTPS would be looking into solutions to this. There must be some way that you can, either by use of, I heard that they had an idea of using, radio frequency ID tags in the uniforms, so that way, they can identify who is real from who is fake. Of course, I'm not sure how that helps the public in terms of a scenario such as this, but the reality is that there is a whole lot more that can be done by the police service in terms of dealing with this issue. And even for the officers who were charged recently, I have not heard any clear statement to say that, look, these officers will be suspended and interdicted from duty without pay. Of course, yes, they have been denied bail. So, it would stand to reason. But there ought to still be a very strong statement coming from the hierarchy of the TTPS to make it clear that this would not be tolerated. In fact, I saw that another attorney had to write to the commissioner calling upon her to make a statement on the matter. Shortly thereafter, I did see a statement from her. I mean, it may be coincidence, but the reality is that I don't think that the average police officer gets the feeling that there are consequences for these types of actions or that there are sufficient consequences. You know, the commissioner has the power of dismissal. The commissioner can dismiss officers from the service. So, you know, these powers need to be exercised in a very strong and stringent manner if you intend to weed out officers, because it makes no sense, Jason, that you have police officers who are charged if they are still receiving a salary. So in other words, okay, so they charged, and if some of them come out on bail, they're receiving a salary still, and then they're what, free to commit their criminal acts. You know, I mean, what is the point of that? So then we're paying them to be criminals. You know, it just makes no sense. So we need to be a lot more decisive. And, you know, this speaks to the whole question of the lack of public trust and confidence in the TTPS. Because, in other words, if it is that the public feels that, well, look, police officers could do what they want, and within the internal mechanisms, you are not seeing that they are facing consequences, then the public will feel, well, look, what's the point? You know, it doesn't matter.
And that's assuming, obviously, officers are involved, because this particular scenario where it's, again, alleged the men who carried out the act on the businessman, that is Mr. Ramnarain, the claim is that they are fake cops. And I'm thinking here, if indeed that's the case, criminals also are using the loopholes, and they are trying to capitalize on what they might perceive to be a weak TTPS. Hence the reason, putting on the uniforms and going into the fold to commit acts of crime.
Yeah, and now the thing is, Jason, you know, my only question with that is, if it is that the TTPS is saying, I mean, I don't know if they have officially said that these men are not police officers, then, I mean, it must be that there has been some level of identification of who the perpetrators are or are not. Because if you are making a definitive statement to say, well, look, yes, these men are not police officers, that means clearly you have seen the faces of all of them.
Yeah.
All right. And, you know, the technology we have nowadays with facial recognition software and stuff like that, then I would want to hear more information from the TTPS as to, okay, well, who are they? Don't just tell me, well, okay, they are not police officers, you know, and I mean, if it is that that's the official position of the TTPS, then they need to go further and say who they are. You know, so, I mean, it's a really, you know, confusing scenario for members of the public when you hear these half-baked statements coming out without any real conclusion as to, okay, who are the perpetrators? What's the status of the investigation? You know, is it that you have identified, well, where these people live, who they are, what they do, that kind of thing, you know, so therefore you are on the trail to be able to arrest them? You know, is there any word as to where this businessman is being held? You know, are you able to go and rescue him? I mean, these are the things that would concern persons. And, you know, I saw an article where business persons in Cunupia were crying out because they said that they are being terrorized by bandits. I saw one where, you know, this businessman says, he says he dresses so simple, he said he could almost pass for a clean vagrant. You know, the only difference between him and the vagrant is that he bathes every day. You know, but he said he dresses in such a shabby way so as not to attract attention to himself. Imagine this is the level we have reached to in Trinidad and Tobago.
And in that regard, what you think can be done? Because obviously I know there is an issue and a serious backlog when it comes to the FUL. It's not being issued. Businessmen are making that request. They want protection. Obviously, some are going the extra mile to hire, you know, trained security, obviously cameras, CCTV
right, but,
all over.
You know, I mean, security guards come at a cost.
Yes.
You know.
So what really can be done right now in terms of what's the conversation like in the business world regarding what's happening?
Right. So, I mean, yes, of course, persons are clamoring for, to be issued more FULs. And I mean, the commissioner has actually faced legal action in some cases from persons who have, said, well, look, I've been waiting too long. My application is pending and you're not acting on it. And the courts have decided that, look, they've issued orders for her to, decide, make a decision one way or the other. But you see, that alone is not enough, Jason. And I mean, I, for one, am not a fan of, us militarizing the country, because if you look at Jamaica, you see what has happened. The more the police are, upping their game in terms of, their weapons, etc. The criminals do the same thing. I mean, in Jamaica, they bring out tanks in the streets and that kind of thing. I mean, thankfully, we are not at that stage in Trinidad and Tobago, but it becomes an arms race, and you ask yourself, okay, how come in the UK, you see police officers walking around without guns, and yet still they are able to keep their crime rate down, So it's the use of the technology that we are failing in. Where is our camera network that we should be able to do clear identification of persons? As I said, I mean, coming back to the same scenario, if you are able to identify them and say they're not police officers, then please tell us who they are. Where did the other cameras in your network pick them up in the grid? I mean, they didn't just drop from the sky and end up at this bar to kidnap this businessman. Where is your camera system that is supposed to trace their movements, track their movements? I mean, Jason, I love to give the example, some years ago while I was in Singapore. Actually, it was for my birthday also some years ago. And, we had a Crime Stoppers conference there. And, the police officers were telling us of a story of, 3 men who went and they robbed a bank. And they said that, the men got away. They got away with the money and stuff like that. And they said that for 3 days, they knew who the men were. And they said they never arrested them. And we were like, huh? So if you knew who they were, you knew they robbed the bank, why didn't you arrest them? They said, no. Our camera network is so sophisticated. We are able to track their every movement. So therefore, they allowed them for 3 days to go and meet with their other colleagues, their other bandit friends, their other, persons who were involved in staging and planning and, where they're sharing up the money and, the spoils. And they said then after 3 days, they swooped down and they arrested everybody. Yeah. So the entire network was dismantled because they had such a sophisticated system in terms of their camera network to be able to track all the movements. Why don't we have that in Trinidad and Tobago?
So intelligence-driven crime fighting is what you're talking about.
That is what, I mean, I keep saying in Trinidad and Tobago, the term police intelligence becomes to seem more and more like an oxymoron.
Well, information in the Well, I guess we could safely say we're in a war because it is a war against crime.
It is a war. It is a war.
Information is your greatest currency. I mean, that is the reality. Whether it's a fight on crime or whether it's a bigger, wide-scale war, information is the key. And I'll ask you this, based on information and the knowings, because I know there are officers who might know of colleagues who are not probably above board. There are seniors who might not be above board. There might be juniors who know seniors are not above board.
Yeah.
Is there that political will? Is there strength in the leadership of the TTPS to truly go after these, I would say, officers who not living up to what they signed up for?
No,
because we have seen Giuliani and others shake up.
Jason.
Remember Giuliani when he shake up the NYPD and total difference?
That's why I'm going to give you this example. Some years ago, I was at another Crime Stoppers conference, this time in Toronto, and speaking to one of the senior police officers there at the Toronto Police Service, right? He was telling me, he said, in their headquarters, he said, you don't know who is who. So I was like, huh, what do you mean? He said, IA. So I was like, oh. he said their internal affairs unit is so vigorous and robust that they hire their internal affairs officers as cleaners, as the person making your coffee, making your tea. It could be your secretary. It could be the messenger. It could be one of your persons that you rely on in the headquarters, for whatever, clerical function. That person could be an intelligence affairs officer and you don't know. So he says, as a result, you have persons who are noting, observing, recording, reporting, and he says they act swiftly and decisively once they get their information. So in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to look at having a robust internal affairs unit. So, of course, we have the PSB, but the PSB is more after the fact than anything else, So in other words, when something happens, then they go, they investigate, they charge, etc. But you need to gather the intelligence, and that's the point you're making, Jason, the information. Because in other words, that information resides within the bosom and belly of the beast. So if you have, say, for instance, persons who are part of your internal affairs unit, who you have working as the cleaner. Listen, people generally, they talk freely around the cleaner also because, they say, all right, that's just the cleaner, of course, the cleaner is an important person in your organization, but the fact is that persons would tend to let down their guard in that regard, So it might be a driver, it might be a messenger. Once you develop that type of system and these persons are able to, gather the information on your rogue and crooked officers, then you can start to weed them out. But you need to start putting these systems in place. You need to start putting these measures in place. And you need to, when you are dismissing and terminating officers for wrong acts or for criminal activities, you need to do that publicly. You need to do the naming and shaming, so that people will know, first of all, the public will know that you are taking decisive action and you are dealing with these officers, and other police officers will recognize, but hey, listen, there are consequences and people are being dealt with in a very serious way for breaking the law as police officers. It's a whole gamut of things that need to be done, and you need to send very strong, very clear signals. And unfortunately, Jason, I think that is not the case at this point, and that's why there's so little public trust and confidence in the TTPS.
And it goes back to what I've said many times here on the program. There are laws, there are rules, but it boils down to enforcement. Enforcement is so important. Let me ask you, it would be remiss of me not to ask, knowing that you sit, and of course your cap this morning is the Tobago Business Chamber Chairman. 25 murders in Tobago for 2024. Your perspective?
Wow. Jason, I don't know where to even begin to understand or fathom how Tobago has come to this sorry pass. I mean, it is unimaginable that the smallest division of the TTPS, a small island, 116 square miles. Are you telling me that Tobago is unmanageable or ungovernable from a policing perspective? What is really going on? And to Tobagonians, I say, if it is that you have the information, if you have the knowledge as to who is conducting criminal activities, call Crime Stoppers, use the 800 TIPS number. It is safe, it is anonymous. You can phone in your information. Nobody will know that you phoned in. Nobody will know who you are. Even to collect your tip, to collect your reward.
Why people don't trust the system?
Well, I don't think it's a lack of trust. I think we need to revamp and revitalize and roll out that program again in Tobago so that people are aware of how good and effective it is. Because, Jason, let me tell you, even to collect your reward, you don't have to identify yourself, You just give the same code number that you were assigned. You just go to the Scotiabank that they tell you, and you just give that number. You don't have to produce any ID, nothing whatsoever, and you will get your reward. So it's a totally seamless process whereby your anonymity and your confidentiality are maintained.
Okay.
So I think that that's something that I would want to recommend to Tobago. Tobago is a small community. It's a close community. People know what is going on. They know who are committing these crimes. Please, I urge the public, if you feel unsafe with going to the police directly to give them the information, call the Crime Stoppers hotline, 800 tips, give the information there, and we will ensure that it gets to the right place so that it can be actioned. Because, I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, Jason.
Yeah, Martin.
You know, I mean, there used to be years when Tobago had one murder, you know, for the year, or two murders, you know, and even that, you know, people used to be scandalized about. Now, look where we are, 25. And wait, Jason, here's the thing. There are 3 deaths that are still not yet classified. That mother and the 2 children, where it appears that it's leaning towards a classification possibly of murder. So then that may make it 28.
Yeah,
Think of that and let that sink in for a small island like Tobago.
Martin, it's really unfortunate. Thank you for the perspective this morning. Happy birthday. Enjoy the rest of it.
Thank
we
you.
get a chance to touch base soon. All the best, Martin.
It's always a pleasure. As I always tell people, even for my birthday, I am working still.
Definitely.
But still enjoying myself. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Same to you, Martin George. Touching base with us, we want to continue with our very